She was a brilliant black financial analyst, meticulous and principled, who uncovered a massive web of corruption orchestrated by her racist, arrogant manager. When she tried to report it internally, he fired her, smugly believing he'd silenced her. He had no idea he'd just unleashed a force of nature. Armed with irrefutable evidence and a burning sense of justice, she didn't just walk away. She walked straight to the feds, triggering an investigation that would bring his empire of deceit crashing down. Welcome, everyone. Today's story is a gripping dive into corporate corruption, racial discrimination, and the immense courage of one woman who refused to be silenced. It's about the abuse of power and the extraordinary lengths to which a whistleblower will go to expose the truth, even at great personal risk. If you believe in the power of integrity to triumph over deceit, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Your support allows us to share these compelling narratives of justice. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Aisha Taylor was a woman whose intellect shone as brightly as her warm, engaging smile, though that smile had become a rarer sight in recent months. At 34, she was a senior financial analyst at Sterling Holdings, a sprawling old-money investment firm with a reputation for ruthless efficiency and opaque dealings. Aisha, one of the few black women in a senior analytical role at the predominantly white, male-dominated company, had risen through the ranks on sheer merit. Her reports were legendary for their meticulous detail, her projections uncannily accurate, her ethical compass unwavering. She possessed a quiet determination, a keen eye for patterns, and a deep-seated intolerance for dishonesty, qualities that had made her invaluable to the firm, but were about to make her a dangerous enemy to those who thrived in the shadows. For months, Aisha had been wrestling with a growing unease. Working late into the night, hunched over spreadsheets that spread across her dual monitors like complex encoded maps, she had begun to uncover anomalies, discrepancies that hinted at something far more sinister than simple accounting errors. Funds were being subtly rerouted through shell corporations, losses inexplicably vanishing from one ledger, only to reappear disguised as assets on another, inflated invoices from phantom vendors. It was a sophisticated, deeply buried web of financial malfeasance, and all threads seemed to lead back to one man, Mr. Alistair Finch. No relation to the officer in Story 25, but sharing a similar brand of entitled arrogance. Aisha's direct supervisor and the head of the firm's lucrative but notoriously secretive Special Projects Division. Finch was a caricature of corporate greed and prejudice. He was a man in his late 50s with a florid complexion, a condescending smirk permanently etched on his face, and a management style that relied heavily on intimidation, veiled threats, and a blatant, often racially tinged favoritism. He had made no secret of his disdain for Aisha's meticulous question-asking approach, often referring to her as too aggressive or not a team player, coded language many women and minorities in corporate America knew all too well. He had initially tried to sideline her, assigning her to less critical projects, but Aisha's undeniable talent and the consistent accuracy of her work had made her difficult to completely marginalize. He tolerated her, but there was always an undercurrent of resentment, a sense that he viewed her success as an anomaly, an affront to his established order. Aisha suspected his prejudice was as much about her race and gender as it was about her unwillingness to play the sycophantic games he demanded of his underlings. Her hidden power was not a vast personal fortune or high-placed connections outside the firm. It was her unshakable integrity, her brilliant analytical mind capable of untangling the most complex deceptions, and crucially, her methodical, almost obsessive habit of documenting everything. Every suspicious transaction, Every stonewalled request for clarification from Finch's department, every dismissive or subtly threatening remark he made to her, Aisha had a record. It was a habit born partly from professional diligence and partly from a survival instinct honed by years of navigating environments where her competence was constantly, if subtly, questioned. This meticulous archive of evidence, compiled not with the intent of whistleblowing but simply as a means of professional self-preservation, was about to become her most potent weapon. The Oakhaven City branch of Sterling Holdings occupied the top floors of a gleaming skyscraper, a monument to wealth and power. But within its opulent wood-paneled offices, a rot had set in. Aisha, after weeks of sleepless nights and painstaking cross-referencing, had finally pieced together the undeniable truth. Alistair Finch was at the helm of a massive embezzlement and money laundering scheme, siphoning millions from client accounts and company investments, enriching himself and a small cabal of loyal, equally corrupt senior managers. The Special Projects Division was little more than a sophisticated front for his criminal enterprise. The scale of the fraud was breathtaking, the audacity appalling. Aisha knew she couldn't stay silent. The potential damage to the firm's clients, many of whom were pension funds and small investors, was catastrophic. Her own professional ethics, her very sense of right and wrong, demanded action. She compiled her findings into a detailed, irrefutable report, complete with supporting documentation, spreadsheets, internal memos, transaction logs she had painstakingly and discreetly copied. Her heart pounded as she prepared to confront the system. She decided to follow company protocol first, to report her findings to Finch's superior, Mr. Arthur Sterling III, the aging, semi-retired scion of the firm's founding family, a man reputed, perhaps naively, to be a bastion of old-world integrity. She requested a confidential meeting, her email citing grave concerns regarding potentially illegal financial activities within the Special Projects Division. Alistair Finch, however, had eyes and ears everywhere within his division. He had cultivated a network of loyalists, informants who reported any perceived dissent or unusual scrutiny. He caught wind of Aisha's confidential email to Mr. Sterling almost immediately. Finch knew Aisha was smart, too smart for her own good in his opinion. He had underestimated her persistence, her ability to see through his carefully constructed financial smokescreens. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through his usual arrogant composure. He couldn't let her talk to Sterling. He had to silence her, and he had to do it now. The confrontation he orchestrated was not one of reasoned discussion, but of brutal, career-ending retaliation, designed to destroy her credibility and send a chilling message to anyone else who might dare to question him. He had no idea he wasn't silencing a threat, he was igniting a wildfire. The summons to Alistair Finch's opulent corner office came with a chilling abruptness. Aisha Taylor had just sent her carefully worded, discreet email to Mr. Arthur Sterling III, requesting a confidential meeting to discuss her grave findings. She had bypassed Finch, adhering to the company's stated whistleblower policy, which theoretically allowed employees to report concerns directly to senior management if they suspected their immediate supervisor was involved. Less than 10 minutes later, her desk phone jangled, Finch's curt, icy voice on the other end. "Taylor, my office now." Aisha's heart sank. He knew. Somehow he already knew. Her attempt to follow protocol, to act with discretion, had backfired spectacularly. As she walked the long corridor to his office, the plush carpeting muffling her footsteps, she felt a cold dread settle in the pit of her stomach. This wasn't going to be a discussion. It was going to be an execution. Finch's office was a monument to his ego. Dark mahogany, oversized leather chairs, a panoramic view of the city that seemed to scream power. He was seated behind his massive desk, not working but waiting, his steepled fingers tapping lightly, his eyes small and hard like chips of granite fixed on her as she entered. 2 other men were in the room, standing like sentinels on either side of his desk. Mark Jenkins, the firm's head of human resources, a notorious Finch sycophant, and a stony-faced man Aisha didn't recognize, likely from corporate security or legal. The atmosphere was thick with menace. "Aisha," Finch began, his voice a low purr that was far more threatening than any shout. "So good of you to join us. Please have a seat." He gestured towards a lone, uncomfortable-looking chair positioned directly in front of his desk, like an interrogation seat. Aisha remained standing. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice calm despite the hammering in her chest, "I believe there may be some confusion. I requested a meeting with Mr. Sterling regarding a serious internal matter." Finch chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, there's no confusion, Aisha. Not anymore. It seems you've been the one creating confusion, stirring up trouble, making baseless, frankly slanderous accusations." He picked up a printed copy of her email to Mr. Sterling, which lay on his desk like a death warrant. This little piece of fiction you've concocted. Grave concerns? Illegal financial activities? Really, Aisha, I expected better from you. Such melodrama." "Mr. Finch, the evidence in my report is irrefutable," Aisha stated, her voice firm. "I have meticulously documented numerous instances of financial irregularities, embezzlement, and what appears to be a significant money laundering operation within your division. These are not baseless accusations. They are facts, supported by the company's own financial records." Jenkins, the HR head, snorted. "Facts? Or a disgruntled employee's attempt to create leverage, perhaps after being passed over for a promotion she felt entitled to?" His tone was oily, dismissive. "I have never been passed over for a promotion I deserved, Mr. Jenkins," Aisha retorted, her eyes flashing. "And my concerns have nothing to do with personal gain. They have to do with my fiduciary duty to this firm and its clients, and my ethical obligations as a financial professional." Finch leaned forward, his smirk widening. "Ethics, duty. Oh, Aisha, you really are a piece of work. You know, for a while there, I thought you were smart. Ambitious, yes, a little too assertive. For my liking, but smart." He paused, letting the insult hang in the air. "But this is just stupid, reckless. You're accusing me, Alistair Finch, a man who has built this division from the ground up, who generates millions in revenue for this firm, of being a common criminal." His voice dripped with contempt. "Do you have any idea how ridiculous you sound? The racial undertones of his condescension, the implication that she, a black woman, couldn't possibly comprehend the sophisticated world of high finance he inhabited, or worse, that her accusations were born from some inherent incompetence or malice, were not lost on Aisha. She had faced this kind of subtle, denigrating prejudice her entire career. "My race and gender have no bearing on the validity of my findings, Mr. Finch," Aisha said, her voice cold. "The numbers don't lie, and the numbers paint a very clear picture of systemic corruption under your leadership." Finch slammed his hand on the desk, his feigned amusement vanishing, replaced by a raw, ugly fury. "Enough!" he roared. "I've heard enough of your insolence, your lies. You come into my office, accuse me of felonies, and you expect what? A pat on the back? A whistleblower award?" He stood up, looming over his desk, his face flushed. "Let me tell you what you get, Aisha. You get fired, effective immediately, for gross insubordination, for making malicious and demonstrably false accusations against a senior executive for conduct detrimental to the interests of Sterling Holdings. He turned to Jenkins. "Mark, process her termination immediately. Security will escort her from the building. She is to have no access to her computer, her files, nothing. And make sure our legal team prepares a cease and desist and explores options for a defamation suit. We will not tolerate this kind of treachery." Aisha stood her ground, her heart pounding but her resolve hardening. She had anticipated this, prepared for it. "You can fire me, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "You can try to silence me. You can try to destroy my reputation. But you cannot make the truth disappear, and you cannot erase the evidence I have." Finch laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Evidence? What evidence? A few misinterpreted spreadsheets, your paranoid delusions?" "It'll be your word against mine, Aisha. And who do you think they'll believe? A disgruntled, fired employee with an axe to grind, or a respected executive with a proven track record?" He clearly believed he was untouchable, his power absolute. "We'll see about that," Aisha said quietly. She knew arguing further was pointless. He had made his move. Now it was time for her to make hers. The stony-faced security officer stepped forward. "Ms. Taylor, if you'll come with me." Aisha looked at Alistair Finch one last time, her gaze unwavering. There was no fear in her eyes, only a cold, hard determination. "This isn't over, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice a low promise. "This is just the beginning." She turned and walked out of the office, escorted by security, her head held high. Finch watched her go, a smug, triumphant smirk returning to his face. He had crushed the threat, silenced the whistleblower. He had won, or so he thought. He had no idea that Aisha Taylor, the meticulous analyst he had so arrogantly dismissed and fired, had already made copies of every damning piece of evidence, every incriminating email, every fraudulent transaction. He had no idea that her hidden power, her integrity, her brilliance, and her unshakable belief in justice was about to be unleashed not within the corrupt confines of Sterling Holdings, but upon a far more formidable stage, the United States Department of Justice. He had fired her, yes, but in doing so he had just handed her the ultimate weapon. The walk of shame, as Alistair Finch and Mark Jenkins undoubtedly intended it to be, became for Aisha Taylor a crucible of resolve. Escorted by the grim-faced security guard through the hushed, opulent corridors of Sterling Holdings, past the curious, pitying, or perhaps fearful glances of her former colleagues, Aisha felt not humiliation, but a cold, clarifying anger. Finch's arrogance, his blatant corruption, his racist and sexist condescension, it all coalesced into a burning determination. He thought he had silenced her, crushed her. He was about to discover how catastrophically wrong he was. She was allowed to collect only her most personal belongings from her desk, her purse, a framed photo of her late grandmother, a small potted plant. Her work computer was immediately locked down, her access to the company network severed. They were trying to erase her, to make it as if her meticulous work, her damning discoveries had never existed. But Aisha was 10 steps ahead. For weeks, as her suspicions about Finch's illicit activities solidified, she had been methodically, discreetly, and entirely legally creating a secure, encrypted digital archive of every piece of incriminating evidence. She had backed up spreadsheets detailing the illicit fund transfers, copied emails where Finch had given thinly veiled instructions for falsifying reports, downloaded transaction logs from phantom vendor accounts, and even made surreptitious audio recordings of several meetings where Finch had dismissed her concerns with dismissive or subtly threatening language. She had done this not with the initial intent of leaking it to the authorities, but as a defensive measure, a just-in-case file, knowing Finch's vindictive nature. Now, that just-in-case file was her nuclear option. Once clear of the Sterling Holdings skyscraper, the city air, usually thick with exhaust fumes, felt surprisingly fresh, like the first breath after emerging from a suffocating tomb. Aisha didn't go home to mourn her lost job. She went straight to a small, unassuming coffee shop a few blocks away, a place with strong coffee and reliable Wi-Fi. She pulled out a burner phone she had purchased weeks ago and a new encrypted laptop. This was not an impulsive act of revenge. It was the execution of a carefully considered contingency plan. Her first call was not to a lawyer, not yet. It was to a trusted contact, a former mentor from her early days in finance, who now held a senior position within the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, a bureau of the U.S. Department of the Treasury. She explained the situation calmly, concisely, outlining the scale of Finch's operation and the nature of the evidence she possessed. Her mentor listened intently, the silence on the other end of the line punctuated only by Aisha's steady factual account. When she finished, there was a pause, then a low whistle. "Aisha," her mentor said, "if even half of what you're saying is true, and I have no reason to doubt you, this is enormous. Finch isn't just a corporate crook, he's playing in the major leagues of financial crime. You've done the right thing by coming forward outside the company, especially after they fired you. That retaliation alone strengthens your whistleblower protection." Her mentor then made another call, connecting Aisha with a specialized unit within the Department of Justice that handled complex white-collar crimes and public corruption, a unit that had a particular interest in cases involving large-scale money laundering and securities fraud. Within hours, Aisha was on a secure video call with 2 assistant U.S. attorneys and a team of FBI forensic accountants. The federal agents listened with rapt attention as Aisha laid out her case, her presentation as meticulous and professional as any she had ever delivered to Sterling Holdings' board. She didn't embellish, didn't editorialize. She simply presented the facts, guiding them through the labyrinthine network of shell corporations, falsified invoices, and illicit wire transfers. She then securely transmitted her encrypted archive of evidence. The lead AUSA, a seasoned prosecutor named Maria Sanchez, was visibly impressed by the thoroughness and clarity of Aisha's documentation. "Ms. Taylor," Sanchez said, her voice conveying a mixture of respect and grim determination, "what you have provided us is not just a smoking gun, it's an entire arsenal. The level of detail here is extraordinary. You've essentially handed us a prosecution on a silver platter." The federal investigation, once initiated, moved with a speed and secrecy that would have terrified Alistair Finch had he known. Aisha, now officially a cooperating whistleblower, was granted full protection under federal law. She spent days in secure locations, debriefing with FBI agents, walking them through the intricacies of Finch's schemes, identifying key players, and helping them decipher the coded language used in internal communications. Her analytical brilliance, once used to generate profits for Sterling Holdings, was now being deployed to dismantle its corrupt core. Back at Sterling Holdings, Finch was celebrating his victory. He had swiftly promoted one of his sycophantic underlings to Aisha's former position and had instructed his team to shred or delete any potentially compromising documents. Unaware that Aisha had already secured copies of the most critical evidence, he even initiated a smear campaign against her, subtly leaking rumors to industry contacts that she had been fired for incompetence and erratic behavior, trying to preemptively discredit her should she attempt to make trouble. He felt secure, untouchable, his arrogance restored. He had no idea that a federal task force was already meticulously building an ironclad case against him and his co-conspirators, their investigation fueled by the treasure trove of evidence Aisha had delivered. The hidden power of Aisha's integrity and her meticulous preparation was now amplified by the full might of the U.S. government. The clock was ticking on Alistair Finch's empire of deceit, and the silence from Aisha Taylor was not the silence of defeat, but the quiet before a devastating storm. Weeks turned into months. Aisha Taylor, under the guidance of her federally appointed legal counsel and the Whistleblower Protection Program, maintained a low profile. She found temporary work as a consultant for a nonprofit organization, a far cry from the high-pressure, high-stakes world of Sterling Holdings, but it provided a sense of purpose and normalcy, while the federal investigation into Alistair Finch and his cabal proceeded with methodical, relentless precision. She knew that exposing Finch's corruption was a marathon, not a sprint, and she patiently awaited the moment when the public would learn the truth she had risked her career and potentially her safety to uncover. Alistair Finch, meanwhile, operated with his usual brazen arrogance, completely oblivious to the storm gathering on his horizon. He had successfully purged any remaining allies of Aisha within his division, replacing them with loyalists who were either complicit in his schemes or too intimidated to question him. He continued to siphon millions, his greed insatiable, his belief in his own invincibility absolute. He even had the audacity to host lavish parties, flaunting his ill-gotten wealth, a grotesque display of hubris given the sword of Damocles hanging over his head. He had convinced himself that Aisha Taylor was a nobody, a disgruntled ex-employee whose accusations would never see the light of day, easily dismissed as the ravings of a bitter, fired subordinate. He grossly underestimated her resolve, the meticulousness of her evidence, and the tenacity of the federal prosecutors she had armed. The first public tremor of the impending earthquake came not with a bang but with a series of quiet, unannounced visits by FBI agents to the homes of several mid-level managers within Finch's Special Projects Division. These were the functionaries, the paper pushers who had carried out Finch's illicit directives, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of greed, perhaps out of a willful blindness, faced with the cold, hard reality of federal investigators on their doorsteps, armed with specific, damning evidence provided by Aisha. Their loyalty to Finch evaporated. Several offered immunity or reduced sentences in exchange for their cooperation, began to sing like canaries, corroborating Aisha's findings and providing even more incriminating details about Finch's methods, his co-conspirators, and the extent of his criminal enterprise. The U.S. Attorney's Office, led by the formidable Maria Sanchez, meticulously built their case, weaving together Aisha's initial trove of evidence with the new testimony from cooperating witnesses. They obtained sealed indictments against Finch and half a dozen of his closest associates, including Mark Jenkins, the sycophantic head of HR, who had facilitated Aisha's retaliatory firing. They secured warrants for searches of Sterling Holdings offices, Finch's opulent mansion, and the offshore bank accounts where he had stashed his stolen millions. The net was closing, silent and inexorable. The climax arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning, a day like any other for the unsuspecting employees of Sterling Holdings. Just as Alistair Finch was settling into his corner office, sipping his expensive imported coffee and barking orders at his assistant, the elevator doors on the executive floor opened, and out stepped not a new client, but a phalanx of grim-faced FBI agents, their badges glinting, their expressions implacable. Simultaneously, other teams were executing search warrants at Finch's home and the homes of his key associates. "Alistair Finch," a stern-faced agent announced, stepping into Finch's office. You are under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, mail fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." Finch's florid face went from crimson to a ghastly mottled gray. His coffee cup clattered from his trembling hand, shattering on the polished marble floor. The arrogance, the smug self-assurance vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated terror. He stared at the agents, at the handcuffs they produced, his mind struggling to comprehend the sudden, cataclysmic implosion of his carefully constructed world. This is a mistake, a misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. "It's that woman, Taylor. She's lying. She framed me." But his protests were futile. The evidence against him, much of it delivered by the very woman he had fired and tried to discredit, was overwhelming. As he was led away in handcuffs, past the stunned, silent stares of his employees, the same employees he had bullied and lorded over, the news of his arrest began to rip through the financial world like a shockwave. The U.S. Attorney Maria Sanchez held a press conference later that day, flanked by FBI and FinCEN officials. She laid out the broad strokes of Finch's massive criminal enterprise, praising the courage of an unnamed whistleblower, whose integrity and meticulous documentation were instrumental in bringing this complex scheme to light. Though Aisha's identity as the whistleblower was initially protected, it eventually became known, first through industry whispers, then through more public acknowledgments as the case progressed. She was hailed as a hero, a woman of extraordinary courage and principle, who had risked everything to expose a vast network of corruption. The charges against Finch and his associates stuck, faced with the mountain of evidence Aisha had provided, and the testimony of their former underlings. Most of them, including Finch, eventually pleaded guilty to avoid even lengthier prison sentences. Alistair Finch, the arrogant, racist manager who believed himself untouchable, was sentenced to a significant term in federal prison. His ill-gotten gains were seized, and his reputation was left in tatters. Sterling Holdings itself, though not criminally charged as an entity, due to its cooperation and the actions being attributed to a rogue division, suffered immense reputational damage and was forced to pay hundreds of millions in fines and restitution to defrauded clients. The Special Projects Division was dismantled. Mr. Arthur Sterling III, horrified by the extent of the rot Finch had cultivated under his nose, finally fully retired, leaving the firm's future in the hands of a new, reform-minded leadership team. Aisha Taylor, though she never sought the limelight, became a powerful symbol of ethical resistance in the corporate world. She had faced down a corrupt, prejudiced bully, had been fired and smeared, but she had not been silenced. She had taken her meticulously gathered truth to the federal authorities, and in doing so, had brought a formidable criminal enterprise to its knees. Her leak hadn't just ended one man's reign of corruption. It had triggered a seismic shift in her former company and sent a clear message throughout the financial industry. Integrity, even when wielded by a lone whistleblower, could indeed be a superpower. The conviction and imprisonment of Alistair Finch and his key associates sent a resounding message through the financial industry. No one, no matter how powerful or well-connected, was above the law, especially when confronted with irrefutable evidence brought forth by a whistleblower of Aisha Taylor's caliber and integrity. The fallout for Sterling Holdings was immense. The firm, once a bastion of old money prestige, was forced into a period of intense scrutiny, painful restructuring, and a desperate scramble to regain the trust of its clients and the public. The Special Projects Division, Finch's personal fiefdom of fraud, was completely disbanded, its operations subjected to a forensic audit that continued to unearth further, smaller-scale deceptions. The firm paid hundreds of millions in regulatory fines and restitution to the victims of Finch's schemes, a financial blow that, combined with the reputational damage, nearly brought the storied institution to its knees. A new CEO and a revamped board of directors were brought in, tasked with the Herculean challenge of instilling a genuine culture of ethics and transparency. Aisha Taylor, whose courage had set these monumental changes in motion, chose not to return to the high-pressure world of Wall Street. The experience, while ultimately vindicating, had taken a toll. Instead, she dedicated her formidable talents to the public good. She accepted a senior position with a leading nonprofit organization, focused on promoting corporate accountability and protecting whistleblowers. She also became a sought-after speaker, sharing her story, always with a focus on the systemic issues rather than personal grievance. At universities, ethics conferences, and even before congressional committees, considering new legislation to strengthen whistleblower protections and combat white-collar crime. Her quiet dignity, her articulate intelligence, and the undeniable power of her lived experience made her an incredibly effective advocate. She used a portion of the substantial whistleblower award she received from the government, a percentage of the funds recovered due to her information, to establish the Taylor Grant for Ethical Leadership, a foundation dedicated to supporting young women and minorities pursuing careers in finance and business, with a strong emphasis on ethical decision-making and corporate responsibility. She wanted to ensure that future generations would have the tools, the support, and the moral compass to resist the kind of corruption she had encountered. The federal prosecutors, particularly AUSA Maria Sanchez, publicly lauded Aisha's bravery and the extraordinary quality of the evidence she had provided, citing her case as a textbook example of how a principled insider could be instrumental in dismantling complex financial crimes. Her meticulous record-keeping, initially a defensive measure, became the cornerstone of a successful federal prosecution that sent multiple high-level executives to prison. For Alastair Finch, life in federal prison was a brutal come-down from his opulent lifestyle. Stripped of his power, his wealth, and his freedom, he was just another inmate, his former arrogance and bluster useless against the harsh realities of incarceration. Mark Jenkins, the HR head, who had so eagerly facilitated Aisha's firing, also served time, his career and reputation similarly destroyed. The other co-conspirators faced varying sentences, their lives irrevocably altered by their greed and their willingness to follow Finch down his path of deceit. Aisha Taylor never sought to be a hero. She was simply a woman of profound integrity who, when faced with a profound wrong, refused to look the other way. She understood that silence in the face of corruption was complicity, and that her skills as a financial analyst gave her not just the ability, but the responsibility to uncover and expose the truth. Her firing, intended by Finch to be a final, crushing act of silencing, instead became her liberation, freeing her to take her fight to a level where he could no longer touch her, where his corporate power was meaningless against the might of federal law. Her story became a powerful testament to the fact that one person, armed with courage, meticulousness, and an unshakable moral compass, can indeed take on a corrupt system and win, bringing even the most arrogant and powerful figures crashing down to earth. Her leak didn't just expose a crime, it ignited a cleansing fire.